Welcome to The Explainer. Now, you probably think you know the story of the Titanic, right? But today, we're diving into a hidden chapter, one you've likely never heard. It's about the one Japanese man who survived, and how that very survival led not to a hero's welcome, but to a lifetime of shame.
It all comes down to a single number: 1. That's how many Japanese men made it off the Titanic alive in 1912. Just 1. And his name was Masabumi Hosono.
You'd think surviving an unimaginable catastrophe would make you a hero, right? A legend even. But for Hosono, it was the exact opposite. His survival was the beginning of his ruin. So how did it all go so terribly wrong?
To really understand Hosono's story, we've got to go back to that fateful, chaotic night in the freezing waters of the North Atlantic.
Okay, so picture it. Absolute pandemonium. The so-called unsinkable ship is going down, and it's going down fast. There were only enough lifeboats for about half the people on board, and a strict, desperate order was given: women and children first. The numbers are just staggering. In the end, more than 1,500 people died. Just over 700 survived. And yeah, the vast majority of those survivors were women and children. Masabumi Hosono, a man, was one of the very few exceptions.
At first, when the news of his survival reached Japan, the media treated him like a celebrity. He was the lucky one, the man who beat the odds. But that celebration, well, it did not last long at all.
All right, Section 2, Accusation and Outcast. This is the story that condemned a man, because the narrative, it turned against Hosono with shocking speed, all fueled by stories from other survivors that got picked up by the international press.
And this was the story that emerged, the one that ruined him. A fellow survivor, quoted in the British press, claimed Hosono had cheated death dishonorably, that he disguised himself, pushed past other people, and took a spot that belonged to a woman or a child.
Now, you have to understand, in early 20th century Japan, the culture placed this immense value on honor and self-sacrifice. So this accusation, it was absolutely devastating. He wasn't a survivor anymore. He was a national disgrace, a man who had brought deep shame upon his country.
The consequences were swift and they were brutal. The public condemned him. Newspapers and even textbooks branded him a coward. And the final blow came when the Japanese government fired him from his prestigious job at the Ministry of Railways. His fall from grace was complete.
So, faced with total ruin and the hatred of his entire country, Hosono chose silence. He never offered a public defense. He never told his side of the story. For the rest of his life, he just quietly endured the shame. The big question is, why?
Okay, Section 3, a posthumous vindication. Because the truth, or at least his version of it, wouldn't come to light until long after he died, all thanks to a discovery that would change the entire narrative.
He lived with this unbearable shame for 27 years before he passed away in 1939. Then, 2 years later, while sorting through his things, his family found something he had kept hidden from the entire world.
It was a notebook, and inside, written on the Titanic's own stationery, was his detailed, minute-by-minute account of what happened that night, which he'd written down right after being rescued.
Now, this is where it gets really interesting, because his account painted a drastically different picture. The public accusation was that he disguised himself as a woman. He wrote that he was simply in the dark, wearing his pajamas. They said he pushed others aside. He wrote that he heard a crewman yell that there was room for 2 more, and he just took the chance.
His diary describes the absolute terror and confusion of the moment. He said he wasn't some scheming coward. He was a man who had resigned himself to death. He was fully prepared for his last moment, when suddenly a fleeting, desperate opportunity for survival just appeared out of nowhere.
So, Section 4, Judgment or Survival. This really gets to the central conflict of his story. While Hosono's account of chaos and instinct seems plausible, it stands in really sharp contrast to the actions of other prominent men on that ship.
You had these men of immense status and wealth, like John Jacob Astor, the richest man on board, who calmly accepted their fate. They saw their wives and children to safety, and then they stood aside, making sure that women and children first rule was honored, even though it cost them their lives.
So this sets up this profound dilemma. On one hand, you've got the celebrated ideal of noble, chivalrous sacrifice. And on the other, you have the primal, deeply human instinct to survive against all odds. Hosono's split-second decision put him squarely on the side his society just could not accept.
Decades after his death, the publication of his diary led to his name being cleared by many people. His family's long fight for his honor was finally acknowledged. But the debate and the judgment, it continues. So the thing to take away from this is that Hosono's story forces us to look beyond these simple labels of hero and coward. It's a really complex story about cultural expectations, impossible choices, and how a single moment, viewed through the lens of others, can cast a shadow over an entire life.
And that's the powerful question his story leaves us all with. It's easy to judge from the safety of a century later, but in that moment of pure terror, faced with certain death, what would you have done? It's a question that just has no easy answer.